process and authorize a contract with Hare Construction for sanitary sewer repairs on Poplar Street in an amount not to exceed $162,000 and approving an associated budget adjustment. A resolution conditionally and partially approving a final plat within 1 1/2 miles of corporate limits by expedited process having to do with the property and the Schaub subdivision at the northeast corner of Linden and Carrick. And a resolution conditionally approving and amending a final development plan, Phase 2, of the J&M planned unit development on Cottage Avenue, and a motion to release school land dedication fees to Mcclain County Unit Number 5 School District. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The omnibus agenda is approved. I would point out that 3 members of the Unit 5 School Board are here, Mike Trask, Joe Adelman, and Barry Hitchens, as well as Mark Daniel, the superintendent. The amount of money distributed to them through our school land dedication fees is $725,000, which we know will be put to very good use by Unit 5, and we're happy we're able to do this, although it's only every 10 or 12 years we're able to do it. Thank you. General orders. First item of general orders is an ordinance granting a special use permit for a rooming house at 904 West Hovey.
Move approval. Second.
Discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Item 8 is an ordinance authorizing the city manager to negotiate and execute a contract for the purchase of property at 1438 Hershey Road for use as a fire station. Motion for approval.
Second.
Mrs. Reese, I think you've got some comments.
Sure, just a few opening comments, and then we'll turn it over to council. I did invite Chief Humer to come. I would like to invite Chief Humer to come forward to answer any questions you may have about plans for the fire station. As we indicated in our council report, and as council I'm sure is aware, that our original plan to relocate 3 fire stations was a topic of a work session back in 2013. So we've been working on that plan, and the headquarters fire station opened about a year ago on Main Street. And the next station project then is to relocate the current operation from College and Blair and move that to the northeast part of the community. And so the action that staff is requesting of council tonight is authorize me to negotiate land acquisition. And we're looking at the northeast corner of Shepherd and Hershey. And the property does abut a greenway and trail area that goes from Shepherd Road up around the detention basin, as you've heard from some of the neighbors. And so we are here to talk about what that project looks like. In following council approved tonight, should you approve this action, then the developer will finalize plans for the subdivision, and we'll submit those plans to the Planning Commission for review. That will also include a rezoning requirement if council authorizes this, because a fire station location is required to be zoned S1. So that does require a Planning Commission review. So everything will be submitted to the Planning Commission. That will be residents in the community's opportunity to have a public hearing on the matter. We do not have a fire station design. We're not even to that point. This is way too premature. Right now, we're simply talking about land acquisition for a fire station that will likely be designed in perhaps fiscal year 20 and constructed the following year. And so we're just in the initial phases of planning for the next fire station. And Chief Humer is here to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for the chief? I would start with one. I think the question was asked about the coming and going of fire trucks and ambulances, if you want to talk about that.
Sure, absolutely. Number one, we try to be a really good neighbor
in all the neighborhoods that we've been involved in, since I've been the chief, for sure. We all have neighbors at all of the stations that we have. We get along famously with them, I would think. And so, I would like to assure, the community out there that we are a very good neighbor, for sure, for one thing. As far as the coming and goings of the fire apparatus, the station that we're talking about out there, we're probably talking in the neighborhood, I can't be precise, of probably about 4 to 5 calls a day, probably from that location. With the addition of the new headquarters station, almost 50% of our calls come out of that station now, which is exactly what we told the council was going to happen, because we basically built that fire station in a location where it was ground zero for the majority of the calls. And so about 48% of those calls are today being responded from that station. So that does lower the number of calls, ambulances, and fire responses from the other stations. So I do believe that we're looking at probably 4 to 5 calls per day. Now, obviously, some days are busier than others, and some days it might be 2 calls, and some days it might be 8 calls. I can't guarantee that. But as far as leaving the station, as Ms. Reese said, we don't have a design for the station right now. We have a concept in our mind of what we think it's going to look like. We don't plan on entering onto the roadway or highway on Shepherd. We plan on entering and exiting off of Hershey, the farthest point from the subdivision. So it's kind of similar to the old Station 2, if you remember the one that we decommissioned last year, where you kind of came in off of Adelaide Street. You didn't come in off of Gregory, where there was a setback from the intersection, and that's where we exited to get out onto the roadway, and then we entered further down the road at the back of the station. And that's what we believe that we would probably do with this one, because we knew that there was going to be some anxiety, from the neighbors, and that there would be some concern about noise and things like that. So those are some of the things that we've been thinking about as we've been looking at this property, to relieve some of the noise of the returning apparatus or leaving apparatus. The retired trooper is exactly right. If you're operating an emergency vehicle on the road and you're headed down the road, you're supposed to operate with all of your emergency lights and siren operating. Now, that's not to say that at 3 o'clock in the morning, when we leave Station 3 on Rab Road in a residential area, and there is not a car in sight anywhere, that we don't not put our foot on the siren and wake everybody up for a quarter of a mile. We're very cautious about what we do. If we're going to enter an intersection that is a busy intersection or anything like that, obviously we're going to use red lights, sirens, air horns, whatever we need to use to make sure that it's safe. But obviously, our people are professionals. They drive these pieces of equipment daily, and they know how to operate them safely and still maintain, the neighborhood as we leave there. Now, but when we leave headquarters, the siren is on from the minute we leave there to the minute we go, but it's a totally different situation. It's more of an urban setting.
The other thing I'll add to the chief's comments is in terms of station location. One of the public comments tonight was about location analysis, and frankly, the analysis primarily is done in-house. It's done using GIS, geographical information systems. It's based on run distance and run time in terms of using driving a fire engine a certain distance, all within the attempt to meet basic standards, response standards, and our standards are to be at certain locations, the farthest location, within 6 minutes, 90% of the time, for 90% of our calls. So basically what we've done with the staff expertise we have in-house is look at the properties in Normal within our corporate limits and basically run distance and run time. By run, I mean driving a fire engine to that location. How long does it take? Every turn is taken into consideration, and how long it takes to get apparatus there. And so that helps us narrow down the locations that are best suited for a fire station to most appropriately be able to serve the citizens in those distances. So we have some maps that we could share with folks in terms of that run distance and run time, but that was all primarily done in-house. And the other thing in terms of land evaluation, other things we looked at involved our engineering expertise that we have in-house in terms of infrastructure. The public has already invested in some infrastructure, water, sewer, et cetera. So we wanted to see what sites are able to be served by the existing infrastructure because we've already invested in that. So.
I would also add that the GIS data, we also enter the real responses for the previous year. So for 2017, we added all the EMS and fire responses to the map as well, and so it populates the map, and so you can see where the calls actually are. And so like Ms. Reese said, we use the GIS data, and then we also drive it also. Not every single one, obviously, but at different periods and different times during the day to make sure that, you know, that it's a legitimate time. We do not use red lights and sirens when we drive it.
Fair enough. Any further questions for the chief? You may want to hang tight there in case there are others. Ms. Lorenz?
Sure, Chief, I do have a question for you. Something you said about your planned entryway on and off of Hershey. Would that suggest, and I know you haven't gotten to any planning and design phase yet, but would that suggest perhaps a more forward setting of the building towards Hershey? And the reason I ask that is because as I did stand there at a particular residence back porch, they did measure 115 feet from just beyond the trail there. So, and then there's some natural grasses and so forth. So, you know, I wonder, where is that building going to be on that plot? And do you have any sense of where it might be situated?
Like I had indicated, and this is just ideas thrown out by myself and my staff, you know, as we look at this, but that the building would be set back off of Shepherd so that there would be a pretty good sized green space in the front. That the living quarters would be on the east side, so it would be closest to the trail and to the homes, which that is the quietest side of the fire station because that's where the guys actually live, sleep, do all that kind of stuff. And then the apparatus bay would be more on the west side, closest to Hershey. I can't say how far west we would go with the station from that 85 feet that you were talking about,
Right.
Ms. Lorenz. But we would do everything in our power to move it as far as we could
Okay.
away from there.
Okay.
And then, you know, we've also talked about that we would probably do additional screening
I
on the
wonder.
other side of the trail, more trees and
Okay.
things like that would just tamp
Buffer.
down any kind of noise
Okay.
or anything like that.
Okay, good to know.
But like I said, these are all preliminary, just sitting around a table, drinking a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, but that's a good reference, I think, for some of the residents who feel like, you know, wow, is this thing going to be right here at my property
Sure, I
line? Or,
understand.
you know,
I
so I think
understand
you give some good clarification there. Thanks.
Sure.
I'm not sure who answers this question, but I did drive the subdivision and the intersections and took some time this afternoon to look at it. And my sense is that there's an elevation drop running east to west on that piece of property. Is that accurate?
That's correct. That,
So it slopes.
That the east side of the property is higher than the west side?
Greg Trummel probably knows. Greg, are you aware?
Off the top of his head.
I know in the very front, we wanted to stay away from, there was a swale between like where
On
the
the south
station.
end of the property or on the
would
west.
be
Greg
on
just
the
know that
north end of the property.
the only apparatus I had were my eyeglasses, so that was just my sense.
Super comfortable stating, like, there is terrain on the site.
Okay.
And as the chief just mentioned, there is a bit of a ravine. Now, that may change as the site gets fully developed. But if I recall, I think it does drop a little bit as you go from east to west, not drastically.
I know it's not drastic. No, I wouldn't suggest that it was. Would berming the backside of that be a possibility?
Probably, that's probably more of an engineering type of question, but I suppose it's something that could be considered, and we can see if that's doable.
As has been mentioned, I think that, the trail right-of-way, for lack of a better word, ranges down at Shepherd, I think, is more in the order of close to 100 feet. And as it works its way up north to the basin, it necks down to maybe around 80.
Okay.
Now, that is not property we were talking about in this concept plan of just how the station might lay out. But berming, depending on how tall you want it to be and then how functional it can be, you start mounting dirt up in the air and then trying to plant trees or
Understand.
growth on it, it's hard to make it survive. But there's some opportunities probably to do.
I would bring that up and just suggest it as an option as any of this goes forward. Mr. McBride.
Chief, could you talk a little bit, and you've spoken in some detail about the big picture, which I think is very important, and your responsibility to cover everybody, but could you talk a little bit specifically about how much of a barrier Veterans Parkway is?
Absolutely. Veterans Parkway, obviously, people know it just in their daily lives when they try to get from the east to west or whatever like that. It's a barrier. It's difficult. They're for fire apparatus and police, they are dangerous intersections just because of the speed of the traffic and a lot of vehicles that block your view, not just our view, but the view of us with other vehicles and bigger trucks and things like that. And so it really slows us down when we try to go, like from the old headquarters to try to go east, like to go to the high school or the nursing home out that way. Our response time from the current headquarters to the high school is 9.5 minutes, and that's just too long in fire and EMS standards. That's why in 2013, I believe, when we came and did the full report on the status of the apparatus, the stations, all that kind of thing, did the comprehensive plan with all that the council, a lot of you who are still on the council and some who have joined since then, basically said, that's too long. 9.5 minutes, is too long to the school. Back in 2006, they had a football, that was prior to my arrival, the year before I came here, but they had a football player who was injured out at Normal Community, and we didn't have ambulances that stood by at the football games at that time. And that boy laid on the field for about 12 minutes before we got there. And, obviously the people in the stands, the coaches, everybody was upset, outraged, and everything like that. And so that's where we went to having the policy of having ambulances stand by at varsity games and things like that, because we just couldn't get there in a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you.
Ms. Cummings?
Just because I also want to make sure that we're addressing a lot of the public comments that were made tonight, because I don't want people to think that we don't listen or pay attention to what they say or how they feel. I know it was mentioned that we have, I don't know if it's the current or the future outlay of what it looks like. If we could, and if it's available, I know we have some photos of the response time now, and then what it would be with that particular, if we change it.
I think the only thing we have, and Chief, and Mitty, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the map that we have that we can display is what it would be the future, the proposed run distance and run
Do we,
time.
can we see that?
Yeah.
I would assume. And this basically shows, as I mentioned, our outside timeline is 6 minutes. Again, that's the longest we would like to take to get to a location is 6 minutes for 90% of our calls. Most of the calls, we want to get there in 4 to 5 minutes. So this is all color-coded, and it's not ideal to see. But the black line is the town's corporate limits, and from there is the little orange spot in the middle is what this proposed location is, and the run time for each of that.
It's,
And you'll
it's
see.
the actual intersection.
Yes,
So just
right.
for run times with GIS, we have to use the intersection, not the lot.
So you can see even to the, even going furthest east to our corporate limits, we're in our standard, our target standard, and then we can also go up north and then also hit the interstate.
Can we ask a question here?
No, ma'am.
We're looking at that dot.
Ma'am, you can't ask questions in this meeting. You'll have plenty of opportunity as this goes forward, though.
Thank you for that. And then also, and I don't know if anybody really here can answer this question. I know there's been quite a few questions about marketability, loss of home values. I know I'm not well-versed. That's not my forte. I know there are some people who may have a better idea or better background than I. Do we know any of that information, or?
I can't say that I have any specific information on that. I did also read that in the citizens' emails over the weekend. I did not have time. I guess I didn't take the opportunity to pull up the Realtor.com information that was referenced, and I haven't spoken to any realtors on this particular issue today, so I don't have any information to offer on that. I can say that, as the chief mentioned, Station 3, I think, is a similar example in terms of its location is immediately adjacent to single-family properties, and across the street from single-family homes. We share property lines with single-family homes from Wintergreen subdivision at that station. I don't have any information on the impact that they believe the station has caused to their property.
And that was kind of what I was referring to. I'm familiar with that, very familiar with that area. And have we ever received any large amount of complaints from them? Because it would be pretty much a lot of the same setup, it looks like, as it would be over in that area with that station.
Well, back in the day, I was involved in that construction project, which was even before Chief Humer was here, I think. But and I have never been involved in a conversation where anyone has complained about Station 3. In fact, but that might be better directed toward the chief if anyone's talked to you about your operation over there.
No, in the 11 years that I've been here, I haven't spoken to anybody about any problems at Station 3. Just full disclosure, at the old headquarters, which is now Station 2 at College and Blair, there were some water runoff issues that the neighbors had, which were addressed by Parks and Rec and Public Works. They put in a French drain, did some landscaping and did that, and I think that was all taken care of. That was several years ago.
Right, that was some stormwater issues associated with our parking lot at the former headquarters station. But in regard to the concerns of noise or pollution or things like that, I have not had any conversations with anyone about that.
Thank you.
Further comments or questions, Mr. Fritzen?
Couple of things. What would the manning be at this type of stations? Would be similar to Station 3 is now, and what is that?
Yes, so it'd be 3 firefighters on the engine and 2 firefighters on the ambulance. So 5, if we're at full staff, it would be 6 people.
So 1 engine and 1 ambulance would be
Ambulance.
what's located there.
Yes.
Would the footprint of the building be similar to what is on Rab Road, or do you anticipate something slightly smaller than that, or?
It would be a little bigger than that.
little bigger.
The apparatus bay, which has not been designed yet,
Right.
just because of storage of equipment and things like that. That's only two bays, and we would probably do 3 at that location.
Kind of response frequency do you have out of that station now?
At Station 3.
3.
It's the lowest number of calls in the department. I can't tell you exactly the number of calls per day or anything. I would say on average, probably 6 or 7, probably per day. If I could just clarify though, since we did move the headquarters to the new location, and it took about 48% of the calls there, the run times and the responses are kind of, I hate to use the word messed up, but we talked about this in 2013, that until all these stations are built and moved and shifted, that there could be some longer response times in some areas and stuff, because the stations just haven't kept up with the movement of the domino effect of.
All of our data points are changing. It's a moving target.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that before we used to do still areas where you said, this address belongs to Station 1, Station 2, or Station 3, and now we use the AVL, the automatic vehicle locators, so it's the closest ambulance, closest fire truck, because the vehicles, for a majority part of the day, are in flux. They're either coming from the hospital to the hospital, Public Works, you know what I'm saying? I mean, they're movement. They're not in a brick and mortar building all the time.
I just observed that probably 2 weeks ago. I was on Veterans Parkway, and there was a ambulance on a cross. I was on Veterans. They were at a stoplight crossing Veterans, and obviously returning from a call, or not in a hurry to get anywhere, and all of a sudden things changed. So
Right.
they left from right where they were.
Right where they were at.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. I know there's no building design or anything of that nature at this time, because it's very preliminary, but you talked about possibly some live plantings on the east side of the building to help conceal the structure itself. I would think any final designs, or we would consider designs that would be sensitive to the environment, that don't necessarily look like a commercial building or an institutional building, that might have a look to it, in fact, that would fit better with that location. Is that fair to say?
That is absolutely fair to say.
The current headquarters station, for example, that building was built specifically to look like it belonged on campus. That it was a building of higher education type thing, with the way that it was laid out, with the stone and everything like that. I would assume that, whether we do a design build or go with an architect, or however we decide to move forward with this, we would take into consideration all these surrounding homes and everything, more of a neighborhood look.
Ms. Reese, you referred earlier to part of the evaluation of proposing the site to us was the fact that there's existing infrastructure. We've already made an investment with public funds, and so this location, compared to maybe some greenfield locations that are, there's some open land out there or whatever, that would make this location preferable to those. And I'm not sure if I understand, on page 8-2, there's a remark about the sale price of $450,000 being compatible with other properties the town is investigating in that area. Is that an investigation for this particular purchase, or is that an investigation of just, here's what land costs have been in that area?
I'm going to defer to Brian. Do you have your packet handy?
Yes.
8.2? Okay.
Yes, and the answer to your question, Mr. Fritzen, is yes on both counts. We've broached this topic with other landowners in that area, and they gave us a higher price. When I say one that says compatible, probably competitive or comparable would be a better term there. We've also been involved in other potential deals in that area, that general area that weren't related to this project, and we've seen similar land prices with respect to those deals as well. So this is average for what we're seeing for development in that area.
I will add, I think that a little bit west of this site is the per acre price is higher than what we are proposing.
So the area that's developing commercially right now, that was referred to by one of the speakers, where Distill is located and whatever, for us to move west into a more commercial area probably would cost us considerably more than $450,000.
I believe so, but, we haven't gotten into great detail of negotiations with those property owners, so.
I mean, that's part of our consideration too, is the stewardship of, our funds. Money was included in the bond issue for the headquarters station to procure property, and so we've got to take that into account here. One of the speakers, asked if suggested that it would be better to address some of these concerns that they have now instead of after the deal is done. So, you walk through the developer finalizing plans, going to the planning commission, at which time there could be public input and review. This is asking us to approve a contract for purchase, but not to, that if at the scenario, say at the planning commission, which is advisory to us, but say they say this is not where this should be, and that's their recommendation to us, and then for us to come back and vote on. And if we were to agree with the planning commission, where does that put us with this action tonight? Does the contract not get executed until it clears the planning commission and we finalize that, or what?
I do not believe the developer and the town would close on any property transaction until it completely goes through the process. Is that an accurate?
Yes, that's correct. In fact, the reason that this came before you as an ordinance authorizing the manager to negotiate this rather than come in as a document itself is because this is anticipating multiple steps, numerous public hearings, and so because it's a multi-step process, this is just the first step. The next step obviously would be to go to Planning Commission for a public hearing on a number of issues, including the rezoning, the change in the development plan, and then back to council for consideration of the Plan Commission's.
So the deal is not done.
No. And if for any
Action is
reason,
taken, but the deal isn't done.
any contingency we'd have to the sales contract or to the annexation agreement amendment would be contingent on approval of the Plan Commission's actions.
And at that meeting, it would be the developer presenting a revised redevelopment plan, which would address, reveal, here's what dense housing means.
Correct.
Our understanding to this point, which has just been, reporting from staff and discussion of that nature, is that, maybe zero lot line attached housing of some kind. We're not talking about high density apartment buildings or anything like that. I think there was a reference, something similar to what exists on Shepherd Road. So that's what we would anticipate at this point, that the developer would come back with as higher density housing.
Actually,
Right?
I think that it's single-family detached homes, just on
Okay.
smaller lot
Okay.
sizes.
Correct.
So detached, detached homes, just a smaller footprint, smaller lot size. Okay.
And just to clarify, when we're talking about the rezoning, I think one of the commenters was talking about issues with rezoning the other residential property. The rezoning we're talking about is only for the fire station property because that's town-owned property. It's zoned as the S property. We're not looking at changing the zoning classifications for the remainder of the subdivision. That would still be
What's the zoning now on that residential? What level is it?
Well, the area where the proposed fire station is being considered is R2, which is mixed residence, essentially zero lot line duplexes as it's platted now. The balance of the subdivision is just R1B single family.
Okay, so if we were to purchase this, then the buildable lots would still be R1B.
Correct.
They'd just be smaller than what the plan originally called for.
R2 along Hershey, correct? R2?
Yeah, there's a portion of R2 along Hershey that goes up a little past the bump out in the basin, a small section. That would remain R2, and then again, the balance of the
But
subdivision.
that's the way it's been zoned
Yes,
and
exactly.
planned all
Yeah.
along. Okay.
So basically, what we would propose is the S1 portion, which would be the public lands, would be 1.74 acres on the corner.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. McBride and then Mr. Preston.
So my colleague and Ms. Reese touched on really one of the things I wanted to drive home is this is kind of step one in a fairly lengthy project or process. So there are a number of steps and a number of things that have to go right before a fire station is actually built. So it's important to stress that there will be opportunities, there will be public hearings, zoning has to be changed, there are a lot of things that have to happen before this is done. So I think that's a very important thing to get across. I do appreciate those who spoke tonight as well as those who have contacted us to voice their concerns. I also appreciate the correspondence from those in the area who've spoken in favor of this idea. And, Chief, when we hear you say 9.5-minute response time to the high school, I don't think there's a person in this room that would call that acceptable. And that's why this conversation was undertaken in 2013. And that's why we're moving along as we are. I'd also like to say that for the last 16 years, we have lived within 2 to 3 blocks as the crow flies. There's a Midwestern expression for you. Within 2 to 3 blocks of the former headquarters, what is now Station 2. And we consider it an amenity. And I suppose when you need that ambulance call, those extra 2-3 minutes can mean a whole lot. So I understand the frustration and the concern. There will be more opportunities for folks to have their voices heard, but what we're doing tonight is really just step one, and I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Mr. Preston?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks to the 4 of you who spoke this evening. I am, as you may or may not know, I'm a former resident of Blackstone Trails. Actually, when I first got elected to council, I lived at 2702 Shepherd Road, one of the 0 lots there in the neighborhood. And it really kind of hits home, and I believe what you guys are saying, and I can totally see that there are a lot of other neighbors in Blackstone Trails who would feel similarly. One of the things that stuck out to me that each of our 4 speakers had mentioned, I believe each of the 4 did, according to my notes here, that maybe kind of a larger issue is, the idea that this kind of came up out of nowhere, and that the neighborhood and the surrounding stakeholders, if you will, of this proposal were not informed or were not sought out for their opinion or their thoughts on this much ahead of time before it's coming to us tonight. And while I certainly appreciate that there are a lot of dynamics that go into why information on items just isn't complete and isn't available and hasn't worked its way through the process until you get close to a time when it's actually ready to come before the council for a decision. I do think that sentiment is one that at least I feel like I've heard more and more on a variety of issues that face us. While I don't know if there is a good solution to it, or if there is, what that would be, I would at least challenge us up here to find, ways, if, as they exist and as is reasonable, and of course, as is reasonable with all the demands on staff too, but, as there are reasonable ways for us to provide information and seek input earlier than just, when the council packet goes public on Thursday, and then, typically media stories then pick it up then, which people would read in the paper or see on the news or, hear on the radio Friday morning. Any way that that process can be elongated and more engaging, I guess, with our residents ahead of just, this seemingly, which I think is completely reasonable and makes a lot of sense, seemingly coming out of nowhere, for some of the residents 3 days before a council meeting. So, again, I don't know if there's I don't know what that means, or if there is even, something that, an approach that could be taken to try and, try and focus a little bit more on that. But it's a challenge that at least I would be interested in, seeing, and certainly doing my part as I can, understanding there are a lot of variables go into it.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you, Mayor Coos. Thank you for showing up tonight to share with us your concerns. Obviously, communicating earlier is always a challenge. I was part of the 2013 planning and decisions and work sessions, and although they were highly publicized, we had very, very, very few members of the public actually attend those, even though they were listed in the pantograph and everywhere. So although Mr. Preston's point is well taken, even when we do believe we're doing a good job, quite often the case is we don't get much reaction from the public. I too live about a half a mile from the fire station to former headquarters, and and I live on Grandview Drive, which was a major access point for that station. And although occasionally I have been woken up with sirens going approximately 25 feet from my bedroom window, it's been a rare occasion. I'll also want to reinforce something that Chief, you said to the residents, if this should come to pass. In looking for locations for my mother and our community, right across the street is Blair House. And in my visit with Blair House in the last 12 months, asking them their experience with the fire station across the street, of course they said, well, you do hear them when they come out, but late at night you guys are pretty good about, if it's not a busy time, of trying to be good neighbors about it. And so if this does come to pass in your neighborhood, I want to reinforce that from a neighbor across the street from headquarters is reinforcing that is the case with our normal fire department. Backing up a little bit out of the details a little bit, as I would expect, but I'm happy to be reassured that as plans get developed, what I'm hearing is that we're going to do, if it happens in that location, we're going to do all the things that we can with the site to mitigate noise for the neighbors as close as possible. Is that okay? I would have always expected us, knowing how we've done things in the past, but I'd like to echo, whether it's a berm as suggested by the mayor, plantings by others, the access on Hershey Road, all the things that you've all talked about, I'd encourage us along the way. In an attempt to be good communicators tonight, how do folks find out about when that planning commission meeting would be, so they can all attend and voice their input in that meeting, should that happen? How do we go about letting them know that?
Well, information about the Planning Commission's meeting agenda is on the town's website, which is www.normal.org, or they can contact city manager's office. We can let them know when the developer is going to have that filing on his documents on file and when it is scheduled for the planning commission meeting.
Perfect. And I know that all the scheduled meetings are online. It's just finding out which meeting that would be on the agenda of, so.
I think it's worth pointing out that planning commission meetings are always on the same day, the same week. They are regularly scheduled, so there's no surprise meetings. It's the third
Third Thursday.
Third
following
Thursday.
the
First Thursday. of
First
each month.
Thursday of every month.
And again, it's been stated, but
After the
First Thursday following the first Monday. So it's not
the
just
next available meeting be December 6th.
Okay.
But again, it's been stated by council, their role is advisory. It is the public hearing, but essentially they make recommendation to the council for
Absolutely.
a final decision. And it's also been pointed out on a couple different, there are a lot of moving parts with all this. And so the developer has been in contact with staff, but understands, the doing things in the right order. And so there's, we're not in a position to be talking publicly until council had made some, had some discussion, made a decision. Also, I would just say as well, the fire station in and of itself, if it gets to that point, because it's zoned S2, it's a public body, it's going to go to another planning commission hearing for the actual development of the site itself when we get to that point. So there are several moving parts here.
Okay.
So
Ms.
once
Lorenz?
again,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay, just one final one. Was going to touch on the schedule is, once again, this is not the end. This is only the beginning of the conversation, and hopefully you'll continue to attend and share your thoughts and interact with staff and us as the process goes along.
Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, I guess I want to just tag on to that. So particularly in terms of the design feature, that would be something that would go to the planning commission when we get to that point. Is that correct?
Correct. I think
Okay. Plan,
at this
right?
point, what's
A
just
site
being
plan.
contemplated is just simply the potential rezoning of that site.
Right.
To accommodate a fire station.
And then once you get to the
And then-
design part.
And then, again, as the chief and Ms. Reese have mentioned, there's not a design in play yet. And so then when we do get to that point,
Right.
if this were to all play out,
Right.
then that project itself would go back to planning
To
commission.
another
and come
planning
to council
commission
to another
meeting, yeah.
Separate of.
Probably in I think you were saying
Probably a couple of years out.
2020.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess that would just be a point I'd want to underscore too. As a former planning commissioner, that's a great venue for neighbors to come out. And typically, you kind of can't miss the notice, because isn't there like the little yard sign that's put out there that says a planning commission notice, or you don't do those
Yeah,
anymore?
Ms.
There's a-
Davison is nodding her head, so
We
yes,
have
I
an
guess we
ordinary
still do
notice
that.
process where we,
Yeah.
inform owners within a
Right.
certain distance, and then we do put up signs at the property where it's fairly obvious.
Right.
Pretty
And
generic.
And I
about
would just want to
content.
encourage too, what I've seen in other scenarios in planning commission and just understanding how the staff works here. I believe wholeheartedly that our staff will work with neighbors who are feeling affected by this to be heard, to weigh in on whether they like a berm or trees or what the screening plans might be. So that's been the history of the town staff here on a number of projects, not just a fire station like this. But I would just really encourage you all to stay engaged in this process and allow yourself to be heard. And I might add too, they are lovely homes out there, and if there's one for sale, I mean, I would seriously consider shedding my big house on a big piece of property for this zero lot line near a fire station.
Mr. Fritzen?
Just in referring to the 2013 plan, and, a couple years from now, before we even, if this all plays out, before we're even looking at a site plan for fire station, maybe think, that this body has to always look at the long view on things, and that's difficult. I know we've had others in here recently with a development proposed uptown Normal, and the short view a lot of times can be very, very difficult to manage. But the very fact that in 2013 we were doing a fire station relocation plan out of sensitivity to the response times, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable, and it's already 5 years down the road from that, you know, and we have one station built. And we're looking at purchasing property for the next one. Then after that, there's purchasing property for the third one and so forth. So, you know, this 2013 plan is going to take, you know, we're in double figures before the whole thing's played out. And so I agree with Mr. Preston's remarks about, you know, being sensitive to the folks in the neighborhood, where'd this come from, you know, and yes, this specific location is fresh for all of us, but, you know, it's part of that long view of trying to provide public safety to the entire community. And, you know, this is, that Veterans Parkway barrier has been a concern of ours for a long time. And this is something that, you know, needs to be done somewhere. Whether it ends up being here or not, we don't know that yet, but it does need to be done. And most likely it's going to be near someone's backyard. I mean, it just is. They are located there now and have been all along. So I think, you know, Mr. McCarthy and Mr. McBride referred to their proximity to Station 2, and I'm not that far away myself. In fact, I'm just you know, a block and a half off of Blair, which is your straight shot to the south, and often you're headed that way. But I would say the train whistles were a whole lot more disruptive than that fire station has ever been. And yeah, it's worth chuckling at, but it's true. And you know, we're in a quiet zone now, and the trains still blow a whistle once in a while, but only when they have to. And I realize you have to probably blow them, press on the pedal or the button on the floor or wherever they're operated from more often than a train would have to now. But on July 12th, they found their way to my home, and I went through this before with shortly after that happened, and thanks, but I don't know that I would want to live right next door to one either until I needed it. And on July 12th that morning, I needed it, and you were there quickly, and you know, a couple hours later, I had been through the heart cath lab and a couple of stents in a 100% blocked artery, and I'm here tonight to talk about it, and I'm glad to talk about it any time. But that's why we need to eventually have a station located somewhere in this vicinity, and why, I mean, there was an email shared late today, but it's why there are people who say, hey, I'm happy to have them because I know what a difference it can make. Well, I too know what a difference they can make, and I'm probably going to miss Station 2 being that close to me because that's not my first event and may not be my last. But anyway, I just think that, you know, people take, you know, I know people said they took a long view of that location when they chose to buy a home there or build a home there, and I appreciate that. But there is undeveloped property around that subdivision that property develops. People buy property, developers buy property in order to develop it in some manner, and you know, this is this is one of those things that can happen to undeveloped property. You know, it's a, you know, can be a shifting scene out there, and you know, if it comes to fruition, I think we've got, you know, reassurance tonight that it'll be done in a as least intrusive manner as it can, and as sensitive to its surroundings as it can be. But again, there's a lot of ground to cover before that even happens.
Further comments or discussion? Mr. McBride?
Sorry to go again. I thought it kind of popped into my head, though, as we were having this discussion, and maybe this is a civics lesson, I don't know. I sense that some of you have done this, and in the past, it speaks to what you were just talking to a moment ago. When I have referred folks to the council report, I find that a lot of times that actually clears up a lot of questions that individuals have, or perhaps better yet, allows them to make more informed or ask more precise questions because the information is all in front of them. So I would just ask, not just on this issue, but as other issues come up about which you have concerns, don't just rely on what you read in the newspaper or what you hear on the radio, not because they're not doing a good job, but because their space and time is limited. And that's one of the reasons their reporting exists, is to allow you to be aware of something and perhaps dive into it a little bit further. I know everyone's very busy, but if you spend a little time to do that and it's posted shortly after we get it, it just might help make you a little bit more informed and can help, again, if not answer your questions ahead of time, maybe come with some harder questions to ask. But I find that makes folks a little bit more informed. So just something to keep in mind.
Thank you. Further comment or question? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance authorizing the city manager to negotiate and execute a contract is approved. Item 9 is a motion to authorize the preparation of the 2018 property tax levy ordinance.
Move approval.
Second.
Discussion or comments on this item? Please.
I'll say, Andrew Hune is here if anybody has any questions, but you've kind of heard his explanations in the past.
Yes.
so.
I would just say that I hope that what's in this report does actually come to pass when it's all settled.
When we get the final numbers.
When we get the final numbers, when the final numbers are in.
Fingers crossed.
That was going to be my only comment. I hope they're a little better.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. One item of new business, a motion to approve appointments to the Planning Commission and the Children's Discovery Museum Foundation Board, and to reappoint to the Mcclain County Regional Planning Commission.
Move approval.
Second.
As this is a matter of personnel, there will be no discussion unless a council member would like to take this to executive session. And seeing no such request, please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Mr. Fritzen, would you announce those
Sure, my
appointments,
pleasure.
please?
We have 3 appointments, one to the Children's Discovery Museum Foundation Board. That would be Patrick Bain. Mr. Bain was recently recognized as the Pig Farmer of the Year. He resides in Aerosmith and has been active with the Children's Discovery Museum at the Mcclain County Fair. He's a member of the Illinois Farm Bureau and is a third-generation farmer. I appreciate the fact that someone outside of Normal's, town limits is interested to that level in the Discovery Museum and willing to be part of the foundation board. He'll be filling an open seat with an initial term expiring on June 30th of 2019. The next one's on the Planning Commission, which we just referred to, Jennifer Swartout. Ms. Swartout is Dean of the Humanities Department at Illinois Central College and has previously been a faculty member at Heartland Community College, has been a resident in Normal since 2013, and has been a resident of the Bloomington Normal community since 2001. She'll be filling a vacant seat on the Planning Commission as a result of Michael McFarland's departure from the commission following a move from our community. So he's still within the greater community, but no longer in Normal. And finally, to the Mcclain County Regional Planning Commission, Carl Teichman. Mr. Teichman is recommended for reappointment to the Mcclain County Regional Planning Commission. His current term expires on December 31st. His new term would expire on December 31st, 2021. Carl is very active in the community in many roles and employed at Illinois Wesleyan University. We appreciate Carl a great deal.
Thank you. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there concerns or comments? Mr. Fritzen?
I just bring to the council's attention, I received a copy of this as a member of the Bloomington Normal Community Campus Committee that still exists. We're kind of in a silent phase because our funding is directed towards the BN Parents group that's a subgroup of the BNCCC. But recently received a publication, I mean, there's, 8 pages of stuff here recounting the enactment of our KEG registration ordinance and the benefits of it. And so it's been quite some time since this was passed, like 9 years or something like that, I believe, or at least 9 years since that effort was started by the BNCCC. So, an example, I think, of the cooperation within our community to address an issue. The idea of the BNCCC initially was to address binge drinking among student populations in Bloomington Normal, and healthcare, education, the cities, the law enforcement, many different groups like that came together to form this committee, and this is a Prevention First publication that, if you're interested in kind of seeing the history behind how we got to that, passing that ordinance, it's an interesting read. So appreciate everyone's support along the way when we were trying to get that on the books.
Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Wow.
It still works.